This is Jambo Radio. A Renfrewshire man branded a beast has been caged for 7 years for sex attacks throughout Paisley. 28-year-old Callum Monsoon was found guilty at a trial at the High Court in Paisley of crimes against 6 women between 2019 and 2023, which included rape, domestic abuse and sexual assault. Glasgow City Council has unveiled major plans to improve the city centre, with 11 projects set to begin in early 2025. The redevelopment, which is planned to be completed by 2028, aims to transform the look and feel of key streets, which will include Argyle Street, Suckyhall Street and Clyde Street, as well as George Square and the Bromley. Scotland's former First Minister, Alex Salmond, was in the best of health before he suddenly collapsed and died on Saturday the 12th of October at the age of 69. The former MP and MSP, who led the country between 2007 and 2014, became ill while attending an international conference in North Macedonia. He was having lunch when at around 3:30 p.m. local time fell into the arms of a fellow delegate after suffering what is thought to have been a heart attack. Sir Keir Starmer has defended the government's plans to overhaul and increase workers' rights as pro-growth. He told a major business summit in the UK he would scrap regulation that holds back investment and would ask regulators to prioritise growth. The government's Employability Rights Bill proposes a number of changes, including to sick pay and parental leave, but some business groups are concerned about how they would work in practice, and there are fears some may put off hiring new staff. And now for African news. A second train crash in recent weeks has left many people injured in Egypt. On the morning of Sunday the 13th of October, a locomotive collided with the rear of a sleeper train en route from Aswan to Cairo, causing 2 train carriages to fall into the Ibrahimiyya Canal in Upper Egypt. At least 20 people were injured and taken to hospital. The carriages not affected are said to have resumed the journey towards the Egyptian capital. And that's the latest from Jambo Newsroom. I'm Andrew Bainey.
Hi, I'm CJ Adebayo Omowaka, and this is Jambo Radio's Black History Month special, where I get to talk with amazing people about their careers, about their youth, and then relate that back to young people of today. If you'd like to listen in live, you can do so at Jambo Radio Scotland on Facebook. You can also follow us at Jambo Radio 1 on Twitter, jamboradio.scotland on IG. You can also email at info@jamboradio.co.uk. If you'd like to call in, it's 01415302787, and the WhatsApp is 0745990682. Now, for my first ever guest, I am joined with the Tina Matembe. I'm gonna move it to Tina. Would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely viewers?
Well, lovely to be here. Thank you for having me on the show, Sisi. My name is Tina Matembe, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Moneymatics Limited, which is an inclusive financial education company set up several years ago to help combat financial education for what I like to call untold stories, so unusual use cases, helping both young people and families to understand and manage their money better so they can thrive in the UK and beyond.
See, guys, amazing. Okay, so I'm going to start it off with a silly question just to kind of break, the vibe, because this is very informal. What's your favorite pasta shape?
So I'm actually a cheesy person, so I like anything that's,
so it doesn't matter the
shape. So I love hearts or spirals, it would have to be, because I've seen love heart shaped pasta and that makes me feel gooey.
That's nice. Okay, let's get into the serious things. Okay, so before we talk about Moneymatics, let's talk about you at my age, because I'm 19. So you're such a driven person now. Was this a feature you always possessed, or is it something you had to hone in adulthood? Like, what were you like at me? Were you this?
I was partying anywhere and everywhere I possibly could get myself to. Uni, very driven, very ambitious, and just I grew up in a quite a rounded home to entrepreneurial parents. So I think I always had the drive. I had the drive growing up, and my teenage years and my early 20s were just about exploring the world and just doing the most crazy things I could pack in.
So like you've always just had that drive. So you talked about like you grew up in a very influential, like entrepreneurial home. Like what are some of those skills that you took from that? Like do you have any like memories of being a child and seeing your parents? Like have you taken any note to that?
Absolutely. I think one of the ones I share the most that had the biggest impact on me was the way our house was set up. My parents had a factory, a textile factory, and it was it was in the same, living space, basically, same area, so same compound as we call them there. And so breakfast for us was a boardroom meeting, and I just remember being really, really young, from crawling, and even my younger siblings, and just sitting at the table and being part of the conversations that were taking place in the factory, in the workshop, and being made to feel like we were making serious decisions. There is such and such an issue going on. What should we do? And we'll all be asked to troubleshoot issues and problems. So I had a voice from very early on, and my parents definitely made me feel like I was in charge.
That's great.
I'm also the firstborn.
I see. Firstborn daughter. So like
saying that though, all my siblings, we had the same access to that sort of, you guys, this is your business. You need to make decisions for it. What should we be doing? And so I've always just been troubleshooting and trying to solve problems.
I see. So after uni and everything, you obviously traveled to the UK from Uganda. So like, what was that journey for? Like, what was the reason behind it? What was the driven? What was the journey like?
So that's a very interesting story, actually. I had been coming to the UK on holiday during university, so we'd have a long break, a 3-month break every summer, and would come out here. And I knew for sure I wanted to explore something before I settled down. So when my husband proposed to me, I was like, you know what? Yeah, for sure, let's do this. But why don't we explore the world before we settle down? And so we applied to a few places, including the UK. We applied to the US, we applied to Australia. We're just, literally pie in the sky. Whoever accepts us first is where we're going to go. And the UK wanted us to come first. So we got our visa here first, and we thought we'll come for a couple of years and see what that looks like.
And you've been here ever since?
Yes, we've been here ever since.
But do you love it though? Like it's
home now. It is home now. When you have children in a place, all your other plans kind of take a backseat, and now it becomes about, right, how do we make this the best place for the children to grow up, and then it grows on you. So I do really like and rate Scotland. It is home.
So would you say then having children obviously children are a big responsibility and a big shift in life. Would you say that that's you have these goals and you have these dreams? Have you had to like circumvent or change or adapt? And what are some examples of that?
100%. Well, for one thing, we didn't intend to stay here that long. We were now way somewhere else. But when you have children and they start getting to, school age, you have to start making changes. Also, career-wise, my career went on hold. By the time I had my daughter, I was getting into a new career. Everything was going really well. And then got back into work, started climbing the ladder, proverbial ladder, and then by the time you have your next child and go back on maternity leave, the workplace is not the same. So it's a whole different ball game when you have children, and definitely a lot of consideration has to go into any plans you make. Okay,
so before I delve deeper into that, I want to take a little bit of like reversing back to your journey from Uganda. Mm-hmm. So I was watching one of your previous interviews, and you said that, from your move from Uganda to the UK, one of the biggest things that motivated you to create Moneymatix was the financial vulnerability. You use the word financial vulnerability, and vulnerability is obviously defined as a state of being exposed to the possibility of being harmed, whether emotionally or physically. So in that moment of feeling exposed, that fear, that uncertainty, what did you tell yourself to get through that? Like as a family unit, like getting yourself up, working with like all of this stress, what mantra were you telling yourself to get through that?
Well, Sissy, that's a great question, fantastic question. But I must say, first of all, that what you tell yourself to get out of things is one thing. We must acknowledge that there were very low, dark days. It's a low, dark time when you are going through stuff. I had never seen luck. I had never not been able to pay for stuff I wanted, and here I was literally having to negotiate with the landlord to bring down the rate, and that felt really, really jarring. I think for me it was the belief that this wasn't me. It was just like, no, Tina, you are way better than this. You're worth more than this. And this is just a phase. You must come out on the other end. And I was so frightened and I hated the feeling that I promised myself, and we swore to each other that we'd never get ourselves back in a vulnerable place again.
Right. So you say that you never had to deal with those situations before, because obviously when you were in Uganda with your parents having that factory, obviously you grew up sort of, can I say that, sort of privileged in that sense? So
Sure.
like the jump from having all of this access in your home country to then coming to this new country, and the floor is basically taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, obviously you tell yourself, oh, this isn't me.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to push through.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how like, what was the first culture shock, like for your footsteps on Heathrow Airport, and you're like, what was the first moment of, oh, this is going to be different?
Coming in actually was okay. Like I had been here before, as I'd mentioned. That wasn't the issue. It's when we moved to make Scotland home, and the reality of living life was like, whoa, first of all, we don't have a network. We don't know a single person. Absolutely knew nobody. That was new. I had never been a day without seeing people that I knew, who I was familiar with, go out to the pub for a drink afterwards, or, just hang out. So having to prove myself again. And the second shocking thing was, this is meant to be the first world. When you come on holiday, it's different. You're staying in a hotel room, or you're staying at a family friend's house, but the reality of actually trying to find my own place, the spaces were small. Life was just not as first world as it's meant to be in the first world. I was like, what is this about being the first world? There's nothing first world about what I'm experiencing or what I'm seeing. And I think the third and most shocking thing for me was this credit penalty for having cash, penalty for not having a credit file, was too shocking to me. I'm like, guys, I have cash, I have assets where I'm coming from. Like, surely that should count for something. And no, you don't have credit, so we can't lend you. We don't know who you are. You're going to be given things at more expensive rates. You're going to be given, electricity on a card and not a monthly meter. Was shocking to me.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you two questions in regards to that then. So you talked about how you had no community. Can you tell me like the steps you took to try and like build said community and, try and ground yourself within it? Because obviously it's one thing to come into a country, not have any friends, but then it's also another thing to come to a predominantly white country. And, there's all of these new things that you're not experiencing, and you've got no one to fall back on. So like, what steps did you take then to do that?
In honesty, the first step that happened, because I didn't take the step, it happened to me, was an absolute fluke. It was just a blessing that we were walking in a car park, literally an Asda car park, with a baby, going into a mall, and my husband had someone speaking our local language, and I just saw him sprinting past the car park, running after this human being who we're still friends to today, actually, and he was just like, I've heard you speaking a language I know, I just wanted to say hello. I've not had that language in 2 years. I am just, he just got so homesick. And that was how we broke into a community, because for the past 2 years we had never been invited to anyone's house. We had never had anyone knock at our door. We absolutely knew nobody outside the work environment, and that was another culture shock. People at work were not willing to engage out with the workspace, so they were lovey-dovey during work. We had lunch together, had drinks at a pub, no one would invite you back, and I found that really difficult to get into. So the first one was a fluke. What I did do intentionally once I started the business was, I knew that I wanted to build this in a way that would appeal to the UK audience, and I was very keen on excellence and just making this look good for a wider audience. And so I looked for a program that I could affiliate with, and I got onto this MBA that helped me to network with fellow entrepreneurs who are also looking to start up on the journey and go and get educated, and that's how I started getting a cohort of people. I then joined an accelerator where I made more friends and more connections. That was more intentional, and that's where I took steps. But in terms of the actual social networking, it was a fluke.
Okay, I think something that's very interesting is that you said that your husband obviously heard him speaking your language, and then he ran in. And I think that that's such an interesting phenomenon that I feel like it's not specific to African and Black people, but I feel like it's one of those things where you hear your language or you hear a name that you know comes from you, and it's like that instant connection. And let's talk about that. Like that's so interesting. Like, I've met you for the first time today, but obviously we have the commonality of both being Black, both being women, both being entrepreneurs, I guess. Like there's that instant connection of, oh, I know you. And but I don't.
Yes,
you know.
Absolutely. And interesting. It's very intrinsic in that you don't realize you have to get out of your space to understand who you are, right? And I talk about this concept where it took me coming to the UK to actually find out I was a woman, and a woman of color, because as I've told you, the way I grew up, my dad was like, you can do anything you put your mind to, and my mom was like, you're going to drive, you're going to do this. So I had just never seen color or gender as any barriers. It took me leaving Uganda to come to the UK to realize I was a Black woman, that was trying to go over all these things. But I wanted to share with you around the commonalities that you actually find when you feel affiliated with a space. I remember going to do the MBA I just mentioned, and we went over to the States, and I came across this organization called the Global Scots, and I felt very Scottish. I was like, I am in the States. I live in Scotland. My children are Scottish. I am Scottish, and just really felt affiliated with the people there, and just that commonality. So you always want to see something that looks like you, especially if it's being done properly. You want to affiliate with it, and it feels like home.
So would you identify yourself then as like being Scottish? Like, I'm a Black Scottish person.
Yes,
and if so, how would you define being Scottish and being Black in society? Like, what is that identity like to you? What do you define it as?
So I think I do feel Black and Scottish. I'm fully Black. Like, that's just never going away. That's my heritage. I'm Ugandan. I'm really intentional about my children understanding my culture. We're very intentional about going back home, because that is home. That's where our roots are, and they'll always be. But then there's the thread and the tapestry of now having lived here, and we've started a business here. They're born here. We have footprints here. We have made it home. When I'm doing money coaching, I talk about understanding where you are at a time and making that fully home, so that you can experience what you're going through fully. Because otherwise, then you always are. I don't know if you know the song. You may be too young for it, but there's a song called "Wherever I Lay My Hat, That's My Home." And
I'm coming up blank.
yeah, it's a good song. Hopefully, the producer will find it and play it after this. But it's the concept of make where you are just now home, and make the most of it until you move to the next phase. And so that's my approach to life. And so I feel fully Black, fully Ugandan, but at the same time fully Scottish. I've had experiences here, including having 2 wonderful children, having a home here, and just embracing that side of where I'm at in life right now.
So what I'm hearing is, like, whatever situation you're in right now, like, being comfortable and like present in it, but don't be stagnant, know that, there's something else that might be coming afterwards, and, still have goals and still drive, but don't just see it as a temporary thing that doesn't belong to you.
Absolutely.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because there's the whole, you're always trying to chase a destination and you forget about the here and now. But look, you can make the present as good as you can and keep moving towards whatever your end goal is.
That's perfect. I think that's something very interesting you said, was obviously your parents instilled in you that feeling of, it doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want, And it's interesting because the almost, I would say, biased Western ideal of Uganda is very different from that. So I would say, like, another thing that I, in my opinion, probably would have been shocked is, like, coming to this first world country and I'm being discriminated against because of my race, discriminated against because of where I come from, of my gender, and, to then hear these people that are discriminating me talk bad about my country. Like, how is that? How's that feeling?
I just remember feeling really, really shocked at how ignorant people can be, not having experienced anything, and I just remember everyone thinking that Uganda was this really, really run down rotten place. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's gorgeous. And it's like every place, the same as Scotland. There's ports that are horrible, right? But that doesn't discount the whole country. It doesn't discount the whole nation, right? But there just seem to be this stereotype of Africa and certainly Uganda just being this disadvantaged, run-down place that's on its last knees. And I was just very shocked at that, because that was not my reality, and certainly isn't for most of the people that I know. And whilst I totally understand and respect the fact that yes, there is pots of badness everywhere, there is pots of badness in the UK as well. And so actually one thing I went about intentionally doing was it was important to me that the narrative my children experienced was a true narrative. And so we incorporated into our lifestyle to ensure that they experienced Uganda or their heritage for themselves, so that they could have their own story and not have to be told what Uganda is like from anyone else's perspective. So we've been very intentional about that. We go back to Uganda often. We travel quite a bit so that they can just get a wider and more informed perspective of the world in the whole. And I think ignorance is not a good thing.
I say this is, I guess I would be first generational in the sense that obviously my mom came here. I would say that navigating the relationship of my mother's lived experience in Nigeria versus my lived experience here, because obviously she wasn't raised with that racism. How do you like navigate those conversations with your children? I know you say you take them to Uganda, you're trying to give them the real narrative of what Uganda is, and my mom tries to do the same with Nigeria. But how do you navigate those conversations of your child coming back from school and being like, "Mommy, this happened," or "Mommy, why is that person staring at us like that?" or "Mommy, what does the N-word mean?" and things like, how did you go about that? Because I know that it can be very difficult.
It's really tough. It's actually the toughest thing that I've had to do, second to starting a business. I think the first thing I did early on was admit to them that I was learning as well. I explained to them my background, my heritage, and I said to them, listen, this just did not happen to me. I just cannot relate to most of these experiences. First of all, from even understanding when racism is happening, sometimes it took me a while to be able to translate what racism was. So I was very clear and honest with them from the onset that, guys, we are going through this together. I am learning because this is not what I've grown up with. And so we're going to have to learn together and we're going to walk the journey together. So I really made it very open. We really do have a very open conversation with each other. We'll research openly. We will refer to resources. We'll sharing what's going on to help us build our resilience has been amazing. And interestingly enough, just over the past few years, for sure, the tables have turned. They're so open and happy to have conversations around it that they're educating us now, and they know we are all learning together. And so a place of learning is not of shame. And so when we have to approach something like racism, we do it together and we reflect on the approach we've taken, and we know that there is a possibility there was a better way to deal with it, or there was a better way to address it or stop it, and we make sure we incorporate that in the next experience.
Because I feel like that's really interesting, because I would say that the UK, like Scotland, the UK specifically, has a very like British brand of racism. I feel like it's very hard to explain. A few days ago I had a talk and I described it as like soft racism, not soft in the fact that it's not hurtful or it's not painful, but soft in the way as in like it creeps up on you, like almost microaggressions, but not because it's only a part of it. And it's such a uniquely deranged experience, because it's like, this is crazy, I don't know why this is happening, and then being unable to express it in words. So then the like idea is, oh, it's not happening, because if you can't explain why you're hurt or you're upset, then obviously there's not a problem. You're just you're over exaggerating, you're being dramatic. Like, have you ever felt like in spaces where something's happened and you're like, that's not right, but you don't really know how to address it, because what words would you use for that?
I totally agree that the British politeness is definitely a big barrier to addressing racism and any type of thing. Even in the business space, you have a really rude and snide comment, but put so politely that you're questioning yourself if you had right. One thing I've learned to do is to make it about how it's made me feel, because truly and really, nobody should make you feel down. So taking ownership, taking back the ownership and taking back the right to say to you that what you've done has upset me. So that is nothing about what you intended to do. I'm telling you that your actions were not right, that your actions made me feel this way. Can give you a bit more authority in the space, because I found in the beginning when you explain what's been happening, it would then become about, I didn't mean it like that. Well, you didn't mean it like that, but this is what the implications of what you've said or done are. And that's a starting point. I speak to my children about never letting anybody take away what their emotional space is. If you're not feeling good about something, you are not feeling good about something. And that's just the bottom line. Nobody has a right to make you feel any differently.
Yeah, I feel like when people try to backtrack and it's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. It's like people are so scared they're more scared of being called racist than actually doing the act of racism. And they're more scared of being the bad guy than actually doing the bad action. And I find that like dynamic so interesting.
The other upsetting thing with it is it then becomes about you become the bad person because
you start doing the labor.
You're sensitive apparently, and you're this, and so I've just learned to own who I am. So if you think I'm emotional, actually yes I am, and I am hurt, and that's wrong, and you need to apologize. Another thing I've learned to do is to reflect and have a list of things of what good looks like. So creating that, and we've had these conversations with our family, is what does good look like? What should that conversation have gone like? And so that I use that moment to be able to educate whoever it is. And if they're a good person and they're saying they didn't mean it and they didn't, then they've had an education out of it anyway.
I would say in all of these moments that these are happening and you're stopping and being like, that's not right, would you say that that's like a form of emotional labor? I would say that that's a form of emotional labor, and it's quite taxing. Does it ever like not weigh on you, but do you ever like sit alone and it's like, damn, that was really tiring, like, and how do you offset that exhaustion?
It's 1,000,000% tiring. I actually wrote a blog post, a LinkedIn post last week about the rejections. You don't realize just how emotionally taxing these things can be. All the no's, you keep getting told no, you're running a business and you're not growing at the trajectory you would want to for no apparent reason. You're putting in all the work and you're not getting the results. It does wear down on you. I think the first thing is recognizing and calling out what's happening. So am I doing my part? Yes, I am. So I'm calling this out for what it is. It's a rejection, not of me as a person. It's a rejection in a system that's flawed, inherently flawed. And then making sure I take the time out to recharge. I recently went on a business retreat, and that was when I actually realized that a few months ago I went on a business retreat, and during that retreat, it was a week away with other entrepreneurs, recharging. We were doing a lot of mindfulness and sharing in a business sense, but during a retreat setting. And that's when I realized actually I was really, really worn down. The rejection and everything had gotten to me. I was getting slower in my work. I was getting really upset easily. And having time to stop and reflect in a retreat or something that can help you to rejuvenate yourself can be a really good stopgap to refresh you and energize you until you come back on top.
So like fully making sure that your mental is okay so that everything else is.
Yes, and it's okay to admit when your mental is not okay. It's okay to say you need to take time out. Another thing I'm really intentional about is taking holidays. I am an entrepreneur, but I do need time off. So I will go away for 2-3 weeks. And actually, that's a sign that I'm able to keep this show on the road if it can go on without me, because I think burnout is such a real thing. And if you don't have stop gaps throughout the year where you're stopping and rejuvenating yourself, spending time with loved ones and doing things you love, it can lose meaning.
Yeah, I fully understand that. Obviously in the capitalistic hell space that we're in, it's like you almost feel this like guilt for choosing yourself in that moment.
Yes.
But it's like, no, I need to do this for my body because I'm not going to be able to show up 100% if I'm not 100%.
Yeah.
I do want to take a step back. Early in the conversation, you used the phrase, the stereotype of Africa. And I was like, that's really poignant. And I really want to go back to that. I wrote it down. And I really want to ask you about that. What is the stereotype of Africa to you? Like, how would you connotate that?
Let me respond to that with a story. And you know, again, I must say that there's two sides to every coin, right? And there's two sides to the coin of Scotland. But every time when we had just come to this country, every time there was an advert on TV asking for aid, it was a black, malnourished child with flies in their nose, looking really looking really miserable and bad. That was the picture that was used. And my kids were young at the time, and my son said, "That is crazy, because we never see it about the people in Scotland. Do they not need help too?" And that was just the case. It was like, why is it that all the support that's required is of this malnourished child? Why can it not be? Why are you not showing us pictures of them on the after side, right? And that is not certainly the truth of Africa as a whole. It was just this one lane, and this one trick pony. And I just found it really interesting, because that was certainly not the reality I'd grown up. Absolutely there is poverty, absolutely there's all these things, but also there's infrastructure. We don't live in trees. Somebody once asked me if the thing about trees was true, and I said, yes, it is actually. We do have, you find the biggest tree at night and stay in it, and they believed me. And so it's just like, are you for real? You're just so ignorant that you won't even take the time to try and find out more about this culture. It's more than just these things you're seeing on telly, and there's a lot more to the place, and there's joy and life to be had as well. Whilst this is true, you don't depict your own communities like that, so it's definitely not intended properly.
I think also the irony of it is that it's one of those things where if you see the way they film these children, and then you see like ads for like aid for dogs, or like aid for polar bears, or like dying pandas, it's the same lens.
Yeah.
It's the same tricks, it's the same verbiage, and it's almost dehumanizing.
It is dehumanizing
in a way, and it's like these children are way more than what you're showing them as, and Africa is so much more multifaceted than this. So yeah, I thought that was really, really poignant. I have a not funny story, but I can laugh about it now. But during 2016, during the Ebola crisis, I have a very vivid memory of being, I think 12 in primary school, and like my white peers coming up to me and asking me if I had it, or if I'd been to Africa recently. I was sitting there like, at this point I had never been to Nigeria. I was 12. I had never been. I only ended up going like a year or so after, but it was just so weird, because I was like, what are you talking about? Like,
yeah, that's crazy. My daughter had a similar experience actually. Interestingly, we had just come back from holiday. We'd been to Uganda. We had been staying on a resort and just had such a wonderful time. And she came back, and they had the whole campaigns that happened during the summer. And they showed a hospital in Uganda that had no beds and that sort of thing. And she was so taken aback, and she was like, wait, miss, could you tell me where exactly in Uganda this is? Because my family should go over and help these people there, right? And it just prompted this conversation around, actually, there's more to Uganda than just people that, and absolutely, people don't have beds in that hospital unit, but there's more to the place, and it's not happening just in Uganda, right? So the teacher did take that as a learning moment and educated the class, but it's crazy, and when you're that age, you don't even understand how to deal with it, right? So thankfully, in her case, we just had these conversations where we're like, always put your hand up and ask if you feel something's not right. You absolutely have the right to ask.
I would say it's also like that ignorance is definitely institutional. I remember I tried to give blood, so I went and I did everything. I cleared out my schedule and I went, and they went, oh, were you born in Nigeria? And I said yes, but I've not, like, it's been 19 years, I'm 19. And they were like, so because Nigeria is a country that is malaria infested, we're gonna have to test your blood for malaria. And I was like, it's been 19 years, I was born there, I have all my vaccines, I was vaccinated here, I've got my yellow papers, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, no, we legally can't give your blood away because you were born in it. Even though it was 19 years ago, we have to test your blood for malaria. And I was like, I feel like if I had malaria from being born in Nigeria, I'd be dead by now, but okay, sure. And it really just, I was like, I don't want to donate blood now, because what are you talking about?
I think ignorance is also intentional. Like, that's something that's so basic, and nobody seems to question the system that we're talking about. It, the politeness of society has meant that even when something is wrong, the society is not geared or trained to, we're just yes men, and so we're saying yes to policies that are absolutely ridiculous, and it's just horrible.
Okay, so we've been talking about race. We've been talking about race a lot. It's Black History Month. We're going to do that.
Yeah.
So this specific question, however, is, so we're Black women. So you were talking about how you experienced microaggressions, racism, like in the space of, like, when talking to investors or industry people, just higher up people in general, like when you're connecting and everything. Like, have you ever felt a disconnect or felt challenges when facing that? Like, not just racism, but just like even though I have all of these ideas, I'm so successful, like I can feel you building a wall between us. Like I can feel that disconnect.
I could hand on heart say every day. That happens every day. And you get to a point when you know the look. There's a glazed look that comes over someone's face. I did say to you, Manimatics is a financial education company. We do inclusive financial education, and interestingly, we get asked the same questions. Are you a charity? That's the first thing, because you've said you're working with the people of color. The first impression is, oh, this must be a charity. So I usually ask, what has the demographic of the people that I've told you that we started off serving got to do with anything? And then one time I was pitching to investors, and it was at a big organization, and the gentleman said to me, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't see a fit for your company in our organization, because our organization serves middle-aged men who are sitting on a lawnmower mowing their garden. And I had to ask, I said, what made you think that my husband or the people in my community are not sitting on lawnmowers mowing their gardens? Do you know? So there's always that nuance, and the disconnect comes from the moment you define where you're coming from or why you set up the business. And that's a daily thing that I've had to learn to, take the punches for.
What a shame. I have nothing else to say. That's a shame. But following that, what would your advice be for young people who are wanting to get into your line of work? Like, how can they not manage it, because it shouldn't be their responsibility to deal with other people's crap. I can say that. But what are some things that you use to ground yourself in that, like when you're experiencing that, especially because you are a more mature woman now, but I know like some people my age might feel way more discouraged by that, and it might defeat them in that sense, because we're young and we're new to everything.
Yeah, I think two things. First of all, sadly, we really do still have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. And if you settle that in your mind and you work to be excellent, make sure there cannot be a question or an excuse about your delivery and the excellence of how you show up. That's one thing that I've decided. I'm like, if anything comes out of this, it's not going to be on me. That's the first thing I had to settle in my mind. I was like, yeah, this really is true. It is true that I'm going to have to work twice as hard. So I am going to work twice as hard. I'm going to make sure I'm excellent and I show up excellently, so that if anything comes up, I have something to point to. So that's the first thing. Be excellent. Show up when you're supposed to show up. Go over and beyond. Do what you're supposed to do. The second thing, though, that's just as important, you have to call it out. If we all don't call out what's going on, there's not going to be any change. So, for example, I've told you about all the rejections. Every time I get a rejection, I'll typically go back and either say one of two things. Do you have feedback for why I did not get this? Do you have feedback for why what is the feedback for your response? So that I can look at that feedback and make sure that, one, I'm better for the next time. If there is genuine gaps, absolutely, I would like to know them and grow from them. If there are no gaps, guess what? It's on you then, right? And so those are the two things. Be excellent and call out when things like this are happening.
Being the model minority is so exhausting.
It's very hard work.
So exhausting. Okay, so I'm seeing for time, so I'm going to skip a couple questions. Let's talk about your bread and butter. Let's talk about financial literacy. Let's see. One thing I've noticed not just in my age group, but across the board, is this shame or inability to admit you're struggling. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the first step to financial freedom is like accepting that you're currently not financially free. So how do you go about starting these hard conversations with our peers and with our families? Because it's like it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, I'm struggling, but it's another thing to be like, no, I'm actually struggling. Like I need help. Like I need a way out of this.
Well, that's a topic really close to my heart, and I think it's really important what you say to yourself. Very important what you say to yourself. So I told you about the time when we're going through the financial vulnerability. It's saying, it's not even thinking about it as struggling. It's saying, where are we now? Where are we at? Because like, where do we start, right? And then taking stock of where you're at. Don't think about it as struggling. Don't think about it as what you lack. Don't think about it in those terms. Just take stock. Take stock of where you are at just now. And then you're like, right, this is where I'm at just now. And this is where I need to go. So map out a route. I'm here. Take the emotion out of it. Because when you think about it as struggling, and I've been there, you go down this whole rabbit hole of emotional despair and depression, actually. But if you just think about it as taking stock, right, this is where I'm at today. This is where I need to get to. And so what do we need to do to get to from A to Z, right? And mapping it out that way. Think of it as creating this roadmap from where you are to where you need to go.
Okay. Let me see. So in your book, Thriving Beyond Borders, Managing Money in a New Country, I've read a couple chapters. There's a lot of personal stories from a variety of people. Can you tell me about like the writing process? So like the initial idea, the collating of experiencing, the editing phase, not like the pitching of it, like how is that?
Ooh, very good question. That's one of the hardest projects I've ever had to do. I talked about at the book launch, I talked about the burden of representation, or rather the privilege of representation, because I just felt like I was carrying people's stories, people's experiences, and it was important to me to be authentic to their truth and to their realities and to their experiences. While remaining dignified, it was important for me to give them a dignified experience. We've talked about the adverts showing you the child that's malnourished and that. I did not want to do that because I wanted us to show up as the majestic royal people, the resilient, bold and beautiful people that we are, that we've come from a different country and made this place home. So remaining authentic to that while staying true to someone's story was so difficult. It took me 2 years to get that project right because it was trying to merge everything together, remain true to the education, but remain true to the storytelling, and also remain true to the simplicity. I wanted it to be simple enough for anybody that would ever walk the path that I and the people that in the book had walked, to find it easy enough to palate and see themselves as the next person that was going to be bold and resilient and walk the path to financial freedom in the UK. So that was really important.
Speaking of some of the people in the book, obviously I'm not going to ask you for your favorite story because they're all your favorite story, of course.
They absolutely are.
But is there a specific one that, you know, you'd like to like point out and run down for our very lovely viewers over here?
I think, to be honest, all the stories were amazing. I was most humbled by the stories from our older contributors. We had someone who was 82 years old. Ooh. And they'd been here for over 45 years. It was just so humbling to see the journey they had taken, and sad in ways that the same struggles that they faced 45, 50 years ago, I faced when I moved here 16 years ago. So it was just really sad to see that actually the system has not changed much from that regard. But the rigorness in which they showed up, these people, and the way they just showed up as themselves and the things they've managed to achieve was such a celebratory piece. So I would say our older contributors were just the most humbling for me, and they made the project so worthwhile.
So how did you reach out to these people? Because obviously there was a huge variety. You just talked about like an 80-year-old, which is crazy.
Yes.
But then I know that there were some 20-year-olds and there 35-year-olds, a mother and daughter pair, I believe.
That's correct.
Yeah. How was the process for? See, I told you I read it.
You absolutely did. Yes, I think, as I say, we've been blessed. I've been building the Manimatics community since 2018 formally, and so you've done a few things. You've been around the block a few times, so reaching out to community who knew who I was and sharing with them the project and the vision I had for it was a very good way. And then once I had 3 or 4 people buying in, we had a ripple effect of word of mouth that came through. So it was a fantastic project. We used to run the cafes every week for about 9 months, and they were jam-packed because someone would tell someone else, and it was just a very nice and unique project in that sense. So initially from our Manimatics community, and it just became a ripple effect of word of mouth.
Okay, can I ask about your Manimatics community? Because obviously it's built from 2018, but how has that changed your life in that sense? Because obviously it's everything starts off small and then it just like expands. And is there anything now that you can see in hindsight that, not like you would have changed or anything, but it's like, I wish I did this a little bit differently, or I wish I did this instead of that, or I wish I was much more confident when doing this. And obviously it's going to be a yes, but I need you to pick one.
I wish I'd been more comfortable with failing sooner. Because I have failed so many times, and sometimes I knew that something was failing, but I wasn't brave enough to call it out at the time. If I had failed sooner, I would certainly have gone quicker, because I knew that I had it. I knew in my gut that I had it in me, but it took me. I spent so long in some failures that I could have gotten out of quicker if I had listened to my gut. So I wish I had been more reliant on my gut instinct, and that I had just failed sooner. Like if I had embraced failure much sooner, I would have got this show on the road way, way, way quicker. So I spent so much time in the failing and the politeness of trying to make what you've tried to build work. But if I had just been like, yeah, not working, let's move on, and just accepted that, I would have gone much faster.
I see. Now, the inverse of that, not one thing you would change, but if there was a single moment during this journey that you would like to relive, so you'd be going back, you wouldn't be changing anything, everything would be happening the same, but you just want to relive it just to know what it felt like in that moment to be doing that, what would it be?
Ooh.
Hard, right?
That's a very hard question.
You can pick. I'll give you, instead of one, because it is quite hard, I'll give you like 1 or 2 then.
I'll tell you what's been really interesting. You don't know who your people are until you're in a moment. And setting up this business has certainly showed me that I have such a tribe behind me. My husband, my kids, my family, my friends, yeah? It's been such an amazing show up of my people, and I couldn't trade it for anything. But the people that have showed up for me have really showed up big time, and it's just made me realize, oh my goodness, Tina, you have yourself a tribe, and it's just wonderful to feel blessed in that way, that I have just a very solid foundation of people that I can rely on.
So it's less about reliving moments, but just like going back to moments where your people were there for you, and just like...
Yeah, because I think the business as a whole is such a myriad of things. It's so many things changing. It's very dynamic here. It's so much that there's no one moment you can hold on to, but it's how you act and how you go through the moments and who you go through them with. And it's been just such, every time I sit down and reflect, I actually get teary. I'm like, oh my gosh,
I'd be emotional too.
I have people, like I have a cracking guy that just is going to be there and do stuff. I have family, I have friends that are just going to drop everything and believe in my vision and just make sure we get it done. It's made me understand the power of the right network, and I just could not be more thankful for that. I think that's the moment. It's like understanding that gosh, you've done something right because you have a great network, Yeah.
So in your network specifically your husband, how has his just full-on support and just like holding you down, like what are some examples of that, or just like how has that how have you like navigated that basically? Because there's nothing better in the world than having someone who's just like, I'm your number two, I'm here for you, like I'm gonna do this, okay, you're going out late, I'll watch the kids, like how has that been?
So how long do you have? Okay, because let me tell you, when you're a woman,
I'll cut you off, it's okay.
When you're a woman of color that has children in a new country where you don't have a single person else to rely on, getting up can be really difficult. You have so many barriers, layered upon layers of barriers, language, economic, physical, social. It's impossible to do anything. So having someone who can just be like, one, I'll watch the kids, you go and figure this thing out. Secondly, the ability for me to just be able to concentrate on this full time is something that I don't take. That's a privilege I don't take for granted. I know many people who have a side hustle that would like to do their business mainstream, but they cannot afford to do that, or they don't have a partner that supports them in that way, and so they have to go back to work, or the partner is going like, you've had your time at this show, so I need you to get, start bringing the income. But I had that latency to basically fail and try and error until I got it right, because someone was being like, you go and get this, you can do this, and watching the kids and cooking the dinners and doing all these things, and then at the same time doing all the accounting. He's an accountant, my husband, and so he does all the books and does all the strategy with me. That is a privilege that not many people have, and I don't take for granted at all.
Shout out to hubby.
I know, absolutely, shout out to you. I have to say though that, we talked about understanding where you're at and taking stock of what you have, and then trying to work out a roadmap to where you're going. I do that with money, but I also do that with the business and what I'm doing. And so one thing I did was I took stock of the resources that I had at my disposal. So whilst I have a supportive husband that was doing all these things, I had to understand, right, I don't know how to navigate the system here. I need coaching in this and this area. I need X, Y, Z. And so you have to try and plug all those gaps, because absolutely you're never going to have everything around you. So if you don't have the supportive spouse, how can you supplement that? You need to do a map out of your resource attributions.
Okay. So, besides buying your book and listening to your interviews, what is one thing a young person could do right now in this moment to start on that journey to finance, like that financial journey to like freedom and everything? This is more for me because
do you know the power of compound interest?
No, what's that?
So compound interest is that it's actually the 8th wonder in the world, according to Albert Einstein, because it's basically the concept of you get interest paid on interest. So you're making money from thin air. So imagine you had £1 today and you put it in a bank account, and the bank account, of course, these are hypothetical figures. If you put £1 in the bank today and that bank account was paying you 10% every month, or let's say it was paying you 10% every year, it means that at the end of year 1, you'd have £1 and 10 pence because you got your 10% interest. Next year, you had the same amount in the bank, so now you have £1 and 10 pence, and you're still getting 10%. The next year, you're going to have your interest will be 11 pence because now you have £1 and 10. And the next year, you've now got interest of 11 pence on the £1 10. So you got interest on something you did not put in. And it keeps compounding, it keeps multiplying, right? And compound interest works from length of time, having money that's working for you over a length of time, right? One thing I would say to you, if you can now, is start putting away in a pension plan. Find a pension and put as little. It doesn't have to be, it can even be £1, because £1 when you're 19 will be a lot more pounds when you're 40. So start now.
I'm too young.
If you're too young for that, do it in an ISA.
Oh yeah, my
put the
mom
money
was
in
telling
an
me
ISA.
about ISAs and things.
But if you start putting money away now, when you're 19, go and do a calculation. It's actually going to be a fun calculation of how much. If you
bad
put
at
a
math.
pound, if you put a pound away starting today for a year, you put away 365 pounds. Imagine what that's going to be worth in 20 years' time. If you do that calculation, put it on your vision board, you will put a pound away a day. I'm telling you.
Okay. Okay. One last question. Actually, no, two. Outside of the compound interest, is there one key thought you want me to keep from this conversation? And I'll give you until I'll give you a 2-minute response.
And this is around money, right?
Just in general, from the conversation, you know, from family to this and whatever.
I'll give you 2. The first one is around money because I'm a money coach, so it has to be about money. If you don't spend less than you bring in, you cannot afford your lifestyle and you're not financially well.
Right.
So for every pound that comes into your life, make sure you're putting away a portion towards your future, especially when you're 19.
Okay. And do you, from this conversation, from talking to me for what has been 55 minutes, crazy, do you have a question for me? I've been asking you all the questions. Do you have a question? You can say no. That'd be lovely. But do you have one for me?
I do.
Oh, okay.
An interesting one that I responded to actually on LinkedIn recently.
Okay.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Okay, in 5 years, 2 of those I would have not graduated, but I would have finished my bachelor's, then hopefully do a couple more things in the university. From there, move on to my master's, do that for a couple of years, and then do my PhD in a foreign country. Ooh. So like pretty much stay in academia until I can't anymore.
Nerd.
Oh, I'm such a nerd.
I love nerds. I have a follow-on question.
Oh, okay.
What does happiness look like?
Happiness to me is being surrounded by the people, not just that I love, but love me. Happiness to me is security. Happiness to me is just feeling content, not like, oh, stagnant, oh, I don't need anything else, but like content with what I have and what I am as a person, content with me. That's what happiness is to me.
Really cool.
Okay. I don't have any more questions.
Awesome.
I think I'm so thankful for coming. This was really, really, really enjoyable.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was so cool. So cool. And remember to do your compound interest. Start putting money away today, Cece.
I'll do it. Okay. Okay. So producer just told me to do an outro. This was the first episode of the Black History Month special. I was your host, CJ Adebayo Omoaka. This was a very lovely, lovely conversation with the loveliest Tina Matembe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Please don't ever judge me for telling you that I've had a change of heart. Trying a little harder each day, trying to work on myself in the right way. Told you I wanted to look at myself. Told you I wanted to be in